August 12, 1847. Magnolia Creek plantation. Deep in the Mississippi Delta. 2 baby boys are born to the same woman, one pale as moonlight, the other dark as river mud. Within 3 days, 4 people would be dead. Within 2 weeks, 17 more would vanish without explanation. County records from that month were sealed by order of the governor himself. They wouldn't be opened again for 93 years. And what those files revealed about superfecundation heteropaternal, twins born to different fathers, was nothing compared to what they hid: a series of murders, a web of silence, and a rebellion that almost burned the entire Delta to ash. Before we go deeper into the dark history of Magnolia Creek, make sure you're subscribed to Liturgy of Fear, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment below telling us where you're listening from, because what happened in Mississippi in 1847 might have echoes in your own hometown's buried secrets. This story didn't begin with a birth. It began 7 months earlier. In the cold mathematics of cruelty that defined life on every plantation in the antebellum South. Main story, Part 1, The Colonel and His Wife. Magnolia Creek plantation stretched over 4,000 acres of the richest soil in Issaquena County. The Beaumont family had ruled that land since 1801, 4 generations of wealth built on cotton, blood, and silence. By 1847, Magnolia Creek produced 18,000 bales of cotton a year, all on the backs of 263 enslaved men, women, and children. Local newspapers praised it for its efficient management. What they really meant was fear. Colonel Richard Beaumont was the kind of man who inspired both awe and terror. Tall, broad, handsome in a cold way. His hair had already turned silver at 34, giving him the appearance of wisdom, though his eyes told another story. They were gray, empty, like the surface of a frozen pond hiding something unspeakable below. His own overseer, a German immigrant named Klaus Hoffmann, once told his wife, "Greater than, looking into the colonel's eyes is like staring into a well with no bottom, and no water either." Beaumont had inherited Magnolia Creek young, after his father died mid-beating, striking a field hand who'd missed quota by 15 pounds. That was the legacy he stepped into, cruelty passed down like heirlooms. He'd served briefly in the Second Seminole War, though not from bravery. Connections to Senator Jefferson Davis had earned him a commission. War, like business, was a matter of politics for men like him. When he returned home, he brought with him a new bride, Catherine Strafford of Charleston, South Carolina. Catherine was 22, educated, fluent in French, trained to smile, to play the piano, to look perfect and say nothing. Her family came from rice money, old Charleston wealth built on the same system of human suffering that ruled the Delta. Their marriage wasn't born of love. It was an arrangement, a merger of cotton and rice, of political ties and bloodlines. The wedding was grand. The marriage was cold. Catherine moved into the great white mansion of Magnolia Creek, 2 stories high, with Greek columns and a widow's walk that no one dared use. She tried to make peace with her new life, but the land itself seemed heavy with ghosts. Life at Magnolia Creek 1844-1845. Her days became a cage of rituals. Every Thursday she hosted visitors, the neighboring planters and their wives. Every Sunday, she sat straight-backed in the pews of Deer Creek Baptist Church, listening to Reverend Amos Pritchard twist scripture to defend slavery. She smiled through dinners, poured tea, and pretended not to hear the screams from the quarters after dark. By the 2nd year of marriage, the colonel wanted one thing above all: an heir. A boy, a name-bearer, a future master. When no pregnancy came, impatience turned to anger, and anger into something colder. Catherine learned to read his silences like storms on the horizon. Finally, in the summer of 1844, she conceived. The pregnancy was hard, endless nausea, exhaustion, swollen legs. But she endured. She told herself that a child might soften him, might turn their marriage from performance to purpose. In March 1845, she gave birth to a baby girl. They named her Margaret, after the colonel's mother. The child was frail, born early, with a cry like a whisper. But Catherine loved her fiercely, the way only a mother who's known loneliness can. For 3 weeks, she barely left the nursery. She nursed the baby herself, against the colonel's wishes. She prayed, sang lullabies, begged God for mercy. Then one morning, April 8, 1845, Catherine woke to silence. Margaret was cold. The doctor said it was crib death. The midwife said it was God's will. But Catherine knew. She'd heard the floorboards creak around 2 in the morning. Heard the cradle shift. Heard her husband's boots retreat down the hall. She told no one. Not the doctor. Not the priest. Not even herself. Not out loud. Because what good would it do? In Mississippi, a man's rule over his household was law. But something inside her broke that night. She wore black. She cried when expected. She stood beside him at the burial, watching a small marble headstone lowered into the earth. But in her heart, she began to plan. Not a plan of revenge, not yet, but of survival. The second loss 1846. She became pregnant again later that year. This time, she was careful. She locked her doors at night. Ate only food she prepared herself. Drank only water. But one evening, the colonel brought her a cup of tea. By morning, she woke with cramps so sharp she could barely breathe. The baby was gone before it ever had a name. The doctor said these things just happen. Catherine never believed that again. By the spring of 1847, their marriage was a hollow performance, smiles for guests, silence behind closed doors. But something was coming, something that would shake the Delta to its core. Because that August night, when Catherine Beaumont gave birth again, to 2 children, not one, Magnolia Creek would become a name whispered in fear for generations. One boy pale as bone, the other dark as the river. And from that night on, the Mississippi Delta would never be the same. To be continued, Part 2, The Birth and the Blood. If you want to know what happened next, the deaths, the missing workers, and the mystery of the twins, make sure to subscribe, like, and comment, Magnolia Creek, if you're ready for Part 2. Because this story, it's only just begun. Would you like me to continue directly with Part 2, The Birth and the Blood, 1000 words in the same cinematic storytelling style next? Magnolia Creek, The Curse of the Delta. Part 2, The Pact. What would you risk to save a child? In 1847, on a plantation where bloodlines ruled like law, one terrified wife and one brilliant, trapped man made a decision that would change everything. They whispered in a library, plotted in silence, and signed an unspoken bargain with danger. If you want the next part of this dark story, hit subscribe to Liturgy of Fear, ring the bell, and tell us where you're watching from. Catherine Beaumont asked the impossible. She did it in a voice so small it barely disturbed the dust motes in the colonel's library. But to Solomon Tutwiler, the question landed like a stone thrown at calm water, ripples that could never be smoothed. She had rehearsed nothing. There was no theatrical speech, no righteous anger. Just a raw, desperate need that had been growing in her chest since the night she buried Margaret. She wanted to protect at least one child from becoming a copy of the man she married. She wanted to keep another life from learning the Beaumont cruelty the way she had. Solomon listened like a man who catalogued facts for a living. He understood consequences the way others understood weather. He had survived by measuring risk, by turning the raw power of the plantation into numbers he could work with. He'd chosen survival over glory. He had chosen the only life the system offered him that offered any protection at all. "You're asking me to betray him," he said simply. "Yes," Catherine replied. "Not for revenge. For a child." She told him about the French physician's note she'd found, superfecundation, the rare chance that 2 eggs, fertilized by 2 different men within a short window, could both develop. She'd read it until the letters blurred. It felt like superstition at first. Then it became a plan. If she could conceive twins, one father the colonel, one father another man, then maybe, just maybe, suspicion or shame would keep the colonel from raising both as heirs. Maybe one child could be kept close, hidden in the margin of his world. Maybe one child could grow without the Beaumont name's poison. "You want me to be the other father?" Solomon asked. Catherine didn't blink. "Yes, if you will." For a moment, Solomon only breathed. The library clock beat time like a judge. The risks were simple and brutal. If discovered, Solomon would be tortured and likely killed. Catherine would be ruined, ostracized, institutionalized, or worse. The people they both knew, the rules that had always controlled their lives, offered no mercy for such a betrayal. "Why me?" he asked. "Because you can read," she said. "Because you move between worlds. Because," she swallowed, "because I think you would understand what it means to steal a life back." He looked at her then as he had that first Christmas when he'd seen the hollow behind her smile. There was pity in his face, a kind of terrible respect. "Ma'ams," he said finally, using the word not commonly heard except in quiet moments, "I don't do foolish things." "Neither do I," Catherine said. "But this is not foolish. It's a calculation." And so they made rules. Quiet, small, practical things that a lifetime in a world where danger waited in every shadow had taught them to value. Rule 1. Secrecy. No one could know. Not Hoffman. Not the colonel. Not the closest friend in the quarters. A single whisper and everything would unravel. Rule 2. Timing. Superfecundation required that relations with both men happen within a short window of ovulation. They would need to plan when Catherine's body was most likely to conceive. She kept a private journal and learned to read the small signs of her own body, temperatures, moods, the quiet language of fertility that a woman in 1847 rarely discussed aloud. Rule 3. Appearances. Catherine would keep performing, the dutiful wife, the hostess, the sorrowful mother. Appearances were the plantation's currency. Solomon would continue his role as driver, moving through the quarters and the house like a ghost no one paid much attention to. The oddness of their partnership held its own power. Catherine had given up on most people. Solomon had learned that alliances, even the dangerous ones, could buy small freedoms. For both of them, this was not a romantic plot, it was a survival strategy with a moral hole in the center. They rehearsed the practicalities. Solomon would come to the main house on nights when the colonel was away on business, usually a river trip or an evening at a neighboring planter's table. Catherine learned which evenings the colonel preferred card games and late returns. She learned how to lock the nursery door without sounding like someone trying to hide a crime. Solomon practiced leaving the quarters with a story that would stand up to any casual question, a meeting with Hoffman, a record check, a supply run. They borrowed time like thieves. Two people can plan forever and still be blind to chance. The first near disaster came on a humid night in late June. The colonel returned early from Vicksburg, smelling of river smoke and brandy. Catherine had hidden a letter from Solomon, proof she was communicating with him, in a Bible on the nursery shelf. She froze when the colonel passed near the room, hearing his heavy steps like thunder. He didn't enter. He only paused, then left again. Catherine's hands shook for hours. She would later say the whole summer felt like that, a sequence of near misses and stolen breaths, each one reminding her that their plan lived on a knife edge. Summer grew hotter. Cotton bolls swelled in the fields, the quarters shimmered with heat, and songs drifted across the land like slow prayers. The plantation's schedule, planting, picking, punishment, profit, marched on as if nothing had changed. But beneath that order, Catherine and Solomon's plan unfolded in secret. Solomon's life in the middle of this system made him uniquely dangerous and uniquely vulnerable. He fed on knowledge. Who would obey orders, who would flee in the night, who ate when hungry and who pretended not to. He kept lists in his head and sometimes on paper hidden in his small room. Those lists had value. They were his leverage. He used them to bargain for small mercies, extra rations, a quiet word here and there. Now he used his skills for something else, to time, to hide, to protect. He began to think differently about survival. Resistance, he told Catherine once, was a long game. "I don't run," he said again, "but I make holes in the fence." This plan was one of those holes. The months tightened toward August. Catherine's secret pregnancy stabilized. The worst of her first fears, another loss, seemed, for a while, to recede. She learned how to cradle hope without showing it. Solomon's visits were fewer but precise. When they spoke, they exchanged tiny facts. How the colonel had spent the day, which overseer had a new temper, where Hoffman kept the extra ration sugar. On the evening of August 12, with thunder low and the river thick with heat, Catherine went into labor. The house, usually a sealed, careful stage, became a furnace of urgency. Midwives gathered, the colonel paced like a caged animal, and in the shadowed corners of the kitchen, Solomon waited with the steady quiet he'd perfected over years of living under watchful eyes. The first cries came like any other birth. Then there were two. The room smelled of hot linen and sweat and the strange new life that comes into the world regardless of plans. One child was pale as bone, a soft thing that seemed to belong to the moon. The other was dark and fierce, like river mud brought to life. For a moment, the midwife's face went blank. For a moment, everyone in the room forgot to breathe. Catherine did not cry out. She only held the two small bodies and felt the word that had led her to risk everything, possibility. But what came next would not be decided in a library or in whispered plans. It would be decided by a system built to protect itself, by a man who measured people as property, and by a choice that would cost them all more than they had imagined. To be continued, Part 3, The Records and the Ripples. If you want Part 3, where the county records are sealed and the first deaths happen, drop a like and comment, Riverblood, so I know you're ready. Don't forget to subscribe and share. This story gets darker. Magnolia Creek, The Curse of the Delta. Part 3, The Pact in the Smokehouse. What would you risk to save a child from a monster who wears your last name? In 1847 Mississippi, Catherine Beaumont made a choice that crossed every line her world had drawn, and in doing so, awakened something dark that would haunt Magnolia Creek for generations. This is Part 3 of The Curse of the Delta. If you're new here, hit subscribe, give a like, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because tonight, we return to the plantation where secrets were buried deeper than the cotton roots. Catherine Beaumont knew exactly what would happen if anyone discovered her plan. Death for him, disgrace, or worse, for her. And still, she didn't hesitate. That night in the colonel's study, her voice was steady, sharp as a blade. "I understand you'd be killed," she said. "Probably tortured first. I understand I'd be ruined, locked away, forgotten. But I will not bring another child into this house without some way to save them. Because I've already watched my husband murder our daughter." The words hit Solomon Tutwiler like a hammer. He had seen terrible things in his life, men whipped until their backs looked like broken clay, families torn apart, but never had he seen this kind of cold fire in a woman's eyes. He studied her for a long time before he spoke. "Is this about saving a child?" he asked quietly. "Or is this about revenge?" Catherine didn't flinch. "Both. Does it matter?" "Yes, ma'am," Solomon said softly. "It matters a great deal. Revenge burns everything it touches. If that's all this is, we'll both burn too." "Then it's survival," she said. "Mine and the child's." He nodded once, slow and deliberate. "When?" "Soon. Within the week." They planned with precision that only fear could sharpen. Catherine tracked her body's rhythms, marking each sign and symptom with the secrecy of a spy. Solomon mapped out the house's routines, where the colonel would be, where Hoffman patrolled, when the staff worked in the quarters. The perfect window came. Wednesday, May 27, 1847. The colonel would be gone to Vicksburg, arguing with his banker. Hoffman would be in the fields. The staff, washing laundry behind the house. At 2 in the afternoon, Catherine and Solomon met in a place no one ever looked, the old smokehouse, a forgotten wooden shack used now only for storing broken tools and old barrels. The air inside was heavy with dust and the faint smell of salt and meat from decades past. Sunlight bled through cracks in the boards, painting the floor in pale stripes. Neither spoke. What happened there was not passion, it was calculation, desperation, and sacrifice. Catherine kept her eyes closed the entire time, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Solomon moved like a man carrying a curse, careful, quick, methodical. When it was over, he helped her straighten her dress, his hands trembling. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Catherine looked up, eyes wet but clear. "Don't be. This was my choice, my plan." "No, ma'am," he said bitterly. "I'm just property, doing what property does, following orders." She shook her head and did something neither of them expected, she touched his hand. Just a brief, human touch that crossed the cruel boundaries of their world. "You're a person," she whispered. "Helping another person survive, that's all." Then she left. That evening, the colonel came home from Vicksburg in a foul mood. The bank had refused him another loan, and failure sat heavy on his shoulders. He ate dinner in silence, drank half a bottle of whiskey, and stormed off to his study. Catherine lay in bed awake, one hand on her belly, wondering if she had just saved a life. Or condemned to. The answer would not come for months. June and July rolled in like a fever. The Mississippi heat was suffocating, over 100 degrees most days, the air so thick it shimmered. The fields were alive with cotton, and the enslaved workers toiled from dawn till well after dusk. 2 collapsed from heat exhaustion. 1 tried to run. He was caught, whipped, and sold, downriver, a punishment worse than death. Catherine's pregnancy grew more visible. Her world shrank to slow steps, silent prayers, and sleepless nights. She and Solomon avoided speaking again. It was too dangerous, but sometimes their eyes met in passing, and in that instant 1,000 words were exchanged. Are you all right? Yes. Are you? Can we survive this? We have no choice. As the summer deepened, the colonel changed. The stress of money, politics, and his wife's condition seemed to twist him from the inside out. He had always been cruel in a calculated way, signing off on punishments like signing checks. But that summer, something inside him snapped. Now he watched the whippings himself, standing silent, counting the lashes out loud. He rode through the fields at noon, watching men and women bend under the sun. He began inspecting the quarters at night, lantern in hand, searching for contraband, though everyone knew he was really hunting for something else, something invisible and personal, some insult he could not name. Magnolia Creek became a place of silence and sweat and fear. And beneath it all, Catherine carried a secret growing stronger by the day, 2 lives inside her, one belonging to her husband's bloodline, the other to the man she had chosen in defiance of everything. In August, the air thickened with thunder. The river swelled dark and restless. The old hands whispered that the land itself could feel when something unnatural had been done, and it was waiting to collect its price. Catherine felt it too. Each kick inside her was a reminder. She had changed the order of things. She had broken a rule written into the bones of the Delta. And when the time came to give birth, Magnolia Creek would learn that every bargain, no matter how noble, demands payment. To be continued, Part 4, The Twins of the Delta. The birth changes everything. One child pure as moonlight. The other dark as the river's heart. If you're ready for Part 4, drop a comment saying, 2 Shadows, hit subscribe, and share this with someone who loves Southern Gothic horror. The curse has only just begun. Would you like me to keep the tone and pacing exactly like this for parts 4 to 10? Cinematic, emotional, simple language, first-person narrator style for YouTube storytelling. Magnolia Creek, The Curse of the Delta. Part 4, The Twins of the Delta. Some births bring joy. Others bring something the world was never meant to see. In August of 1847, inside the great house of Magnolia Creek, Catherine Beaumont brought 2 children into the world, one of light, one of shadow. And that night, the walls themselves seemed to breathe. This is Part 4 of The Curse of the Delta. If you're just joining, make sure to subscribe, hit like, and tell me in the comments, do you believe a curse can be born? The thunder started before dawn. By midday, the river behind Magnolia Creek had turned the color of black glass, thick and restless. The sky pressed low, heavy with rain that refused to fall. Inside the main house, Catherine screamed. The servants said the storm came from her body, that the thunder answered her pain. The colonel stood in the hallway, pacing back and forth like a man waiting on his own sentence. Midwives moved in and out of the birthing room, whispering, praying. The smell of blood and hot linen filled the air. Hours passed. Then, 2 cries, thin and piercing, one right after the other. And then silence. When the midwife finally opened the door, her face was pale. She carried 2 newborns, wrapped in separate cloths. Twins, sir, she said, voice trembling. 2 healthy children. The colonel stepped forward, and the moment his eyes landed on them, his face hardened. One baby, pale-skinned, gray-eyed, with a dusting of golden hair, was a perfect reflection of the Beaumont line. The colonel took that one into his arms at once, murmuring something about legacy. The other child, darker, heavier, with black curls and deep brown eyes, made the colonel's jaw tighten. "Whose is that?" he asked coldly. The midwife froze. Catherine, exhausted but alert, whispered, "They're both mine." "But not both mine," the colonel said. The room froze. Catherine met his gaze, and for the first time in their marriage, she did not look away. "You wanted heirs," she said softly. "Now you have two." For a moment, it seemed he might strike her. His hand twitched, his lips parted, but something in her calmness made him hesitate. "That one," he said, nodding at the darker child, "will not be raised in this house." Catherine held her breath. "Send it to the quarters," he said. "Let it live or die as it may. But it will not carry my name." He turned and left the room, slamming the door so hard the frame shook. Later that night, the house went quiet. Rain finally came, heavy, endless rain that soaked the fields and flooded the dirt road leading to the river. Catherine lay awake, listening to it, her newborns breathing soft and fragile beside her. But when she turned her head, only one remained. Her darker child was gone. She rose, dizzy, and stumbled through the hallway, past the portraits of grim ancestors, down the narrow stairs, out into the storm. Lightning split the sky. Mud clung to her nightdress. She ran toward the quarters, following instinct more than sense. There, in the doorway of a small cabin, stood Solomon Tutwiler, soaked to the bone, holding the infant close to his chest. He looked up at her, the rain running down his face like tears. "He told me to take the child," Solomon said quietly. "Said it wasn't his." Catherine stepped forward, her voice breaking. "You'll protect him?" Solomon nodded. "I'll protect them both, ma'am, in my way. The one up there, and the one down here." She wanted to speak, but something stopped her. The storm howled louder, wind whipping through the trees. Behind them, the old smokehouse door creaked open, though no one was there. And in that instant, both of them felt it, a strange, cold pulse in the air. The sense that something ancient and watching had awakened. By morning, the river had overrun its banks. Half the lower fields were underwater. 2 workers were missing, swept away by the flood. The colonel called it bad luck. But the people in the quarters called it payment. They said the land knew. They said the spirits of the delta had seen a line crossed, a white mistress and a black driver bringing life together in secret, and the river wanted what was owed. For weeks, the plantation smelled of rotten wet earth. Livestock drowned, crops spoiled. The colonel's temper grew wild and unpredictable. He refused to look at the darker child, who now lived quietly among the field hands. Catherine visited in secret, slipping through the night with milk and cloth and songs no one was meant to hear. The baby thrived, strong, calm, with eyes that seemed to see more than they should. The people called him Jonas, after an old name that meant peace, though peace was the one thing Magnolia Creek no longer knew. The pale child, raised in the big house, was named Thomas. After his father, he cried often and slept rarely. When storms came, he wailed until his throat went raw, as though something deep inside him feared the thunder. By early autumn, whispers spread through the quarters. Strange things were happening. Cows refused to go near the smokehouse. Tools left outside rusted overnight. And one night, Hoffman, the overseer, swore he saw a woman standing by the river, holding 2 infants in her arms, her dress billowing in the wind. He fired his pistol. The woman vanished. The next morning, they found his footprints leading into the river, and no return. The colonel said he'd drowned. The workers said he'd been taken. Catherine said nothing. But that night, she lit 2 candles by the window, one for Hoffman's soul, and one for whatever she had brought into the world. Weeks turned to months. The heat faded. The fields grew quiet again. But the damage lingered, in the land, in the air, in the hearts of everyone who had seen those twins born. Magnolia Creek would never be the same. Catherine could feel it when she walked through the house. The walls creaked where they never had before. Doors drifted open on their own. Sometimes, in the night, she heard 2 infants crying, one from the nursery upstairs, one from far away. And every time she heard them, she whispered the same prayer. "Let them both live. Whatever it costs me, let them both live." Clapperboard to be continued, Part 5, Bloodlines and Burials. In the next chapter, death comes back to Magnolia Creek, and the curse takes its first true victim. If you're ready for part 5, comment, "The river knows," subscribe, and share this story with someone who believes every sin leaves a shadow. The curse of Magnolia Creek is just beginning to wake. Would you like me to keep the tone exactly like this, emotional, Southern Gothic, historical horror, for parts 5 to 10? Magnolia Creek, The Curse of the Delta. Part 5, Bloodlines and Burials. They said the river took what it was owed. But Magnolia Creek was greedy land, it always wanted more. After the storm and the strange birth of the twins, the plantation fell under a shadow that would not lift. Animals vanished, workers whispered, and one by one, the people who had helped bury the truth began to meet the same end. This is part 5 of The Curse of the Delta, the story of blood, guilt, and the ghosts that refuse to stay buried. If you're listening, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, do you think evil can be inherited? Autumn, 1847. The air at Magnolia Creek had turned thick and sickly sweet, the smell of decay and river mud mixing with smoke from the fields. The harvest was smaller than ever. Cotton bolls rotted on the stalks, as though the land itself was spoiling from the inside. The colonel blamed everyone but himself. He accused the workers of laziness, Hoffman's replacement of incompetence, and Catherine of weakness. But deep down, even he must have felt it, the sense that something was broken. Catherine saw it in his eyes at dinner. He drank more now, sometimes staring at the empty chair across from him, the one where their daughter Margaret once sat. Other nights he wandered the halls in his dressing gown, muttering to himself, a candle shaking in his hand. In the quarters, the people whispered a different story. They said a spirit had entered Magnolia Creek the night the twins were born. That the bloodlines had crossed in a way nature never meant. That one child carried light, and the other carried something older, something from the deep places where the river touched the roots of the world. Jonas, the darker twin, had begun to grow fast, too fast. At 4 months, he could sit upright and follow voices with eyes that gleamed in the firelight. The others said he never cried, not even when startled. The field women called him the quiet one. But sometimes, late at night, they heard him cooing softly to shadows, and the shadows seemed to answer back. Catherine still visited in secret. She'd sneak through the narrow hallway beside the kitchen, her footsteps soft as breath, carrying milk and blankets down to Solomon's small cabin near the treeline. Each visit felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. She knew if the colonel discovered her, both she and the child would die. But she couldn't stop herself. "He's different," she whispered to Solomon one night. "Different how? He looks at me like he knows. Like he remembers things he shouldn't." Solomon studied the infant by the dim light of an oil lamp. Jonas blinked slowly, as though the world moved too fast for him. "Sometimes the river gives back what we put in it," Solomon said quietly. "And sometimes it gives something else entirely." Catherine shivered. In late October, the colonel's temper finally boiled over. A worker named Elias had collapsed in the field from exhaustion. When Solomon tried to intervene, to beg mercy, the colonel had him dragged in front of everyone. "You've grown soft, Tutwiler," he sneered. "Forgotten your place." He ordered Solomon whipped. 10 lashes. Then 20. Then 30. The crowd stood silent as the whip cracked through the air, blood splattering across the dirt. Catherine watched from the veranda, her nails digging into the wood rail until they bled. Solomon never screamed, not once. When it was over, he stood trembling but alive, his face turned toward the main house. Their eyes met, and Catherine knew something inside him had died that day. That night, the colonel slept soundly for the first time in months. The next morning, he didn't wake up. They found him in his study, slumped in his chair, a half-empty glass of whiskey beside him. His face was gray, his lips faintly blue. The doctor from Vicksburg said it was heart failure. The preacher said it was God's justice. The people in the quarters said it was the river's revenge. Catherine said nothing, but when the coffin was lowered into the ground behind the magnolia trees, she thought she saw the earth breathe, a slow exhale, as though the land itself had been waiting for him to die. For a brief moment, peace returned. The house grew quiet again. The overseer ran the fields without cruelty. Catherine could breathe without fear. She spent her days between her two sons, one in the big house, one hidden in the quarters. But peace in Magnolia Creek never lasted long. Strange things began to happen after the Colonel's burial. At night, doors slammed by themselves. Candle flames bent toward unseen movement. The dogs refused to enter the study where he died. One evening, Catherine heard footsteps above her room, heavy, measured steps. But the only room above hers was the nursery, where baby Thomas slept. She rushed upstairs, and found the cradle rocking by itself. Thomas was crying, staring into the corner of the room where shadows gathered thick as smoke. "Hush, darling," she whispered, lifting him. "Mama's here." But as she turned to leave, a whisper drifted through the air, low, raspy, and unmistakably male. "Not your son." Catherine froze. The voice was gone. The cradle stopped moving, but when she looked down at Thomas, she saw bruises forming on his tiny arms, fingerprints too large to be hers. The next morning, she ordered the nursery sealed. She told the staff it was because of drafts and illness. But inside, she knew the truth. The Colonel's spirit had not left Magnolia Creek. It was trapped there, jealous, restless, bound to the blood he'd spilled and the secrets Catherine carried. Solomon saw the change in her. "He's haunting you," he said simply. "No," she whispered. "He's haunting them." That night, thunder rolled again over the river. The wind howled through the magnolias, bending the trees like supplicants. Catherine lay awake, listening to both babies cry from different corners of the plantation, one in the house, one in the quarters, their voices rising and falling in eerie harmony. And then, between those cries, another sound, a man's deep, hollow laughter echoing through the halls. By dawn, the housekeeper found the portrait of the Colonel in the dining room torn from its frame. The glass had shattered outward, as though something inside it had exploded. Catherine didn't flinch when she saw it. "Let him rage," she said softly. "He can haunt his house. But he'll never touch my children again." But she was wrong. Magnolia Creek had its own rules, and the curse wasn't done yet. Because when evil takes root in blood, it grows. And it always comes for the next generation. Clapperboard to be continued, Part 6, The Ghost in the Nursery. Next time, the line between the living and the dead disappears. If you're ready for Part 6, comment, "The dead don't sleep." Subscribe, and share this story with someone who believes history never stays buried. Because at Magnolia Creek, the past is alive. Would you like me to continue with Part 6, The Haunting in the Nursery, Early Paranormal Escalation, in the same cinematic format and pacing? Magnolia Creek, The Curse of the Delta. Part 6, The Ghost in the Nursery. They thought burying him would end the nightmare. But in Magnolia Creek, nothing buried ever stays gone. The Colonel's grave was fresh, the earth still damp, when strange cries began echoing from the nursery each night, the cries of something that wasn't quite a child. This is Part 6 of The Curse of the Delta, a tale of haunted blood, restless spirits, and a mother's love trapped between heaven and hell. If you're listening, tap like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, would you stay and fight a ghost, or run before dawn? The autumn storms didn't stop that year. Rain fell in endless sheets, turning the fields to mud. The river swelled until it pressed against its banks like a living thing, whispering to the cypress roots. Inside the house, Catherine moved like a ghost herself, pale, sleepless, waiting for something she couldn't name but knew was coming. She had ordered the nursery sealed, yet every night she heard the cradle creak, soft as breathing, from behind the locked door. At first she thought it was her imagination. Then she began finding small footprints in the hall, too tiny for an adult, too heavy for a child. Wet, like something had stepped from the river. Solomon was the only one she trusted. Each evening, after the house quieted, she met him near the Magnolia Grove. He carried Jonas in his arms, the boy bundled in dark cloth to keep him warm. Jonas was different now, stronger, quieter, and unsettlingly aware. When Catherine spoke, he watched her mouth move as though memorizing every word. "He's growing fast," Solomon said. "Too fast. I see it," she whispered. "It's like he's listening to things I can't hear." The wind rustled through the branches, carrying the faint cry of the other child from the house, Thomas. The twins cried at the same time, always. Even miles apart, one never wept without the other. That night, Catherine dreamed of the river. In her dream, the colonel stood waist-deep in the water, mud up to his chest, his uniform soaked and torn. He reached for her with dripping hands. "Bring me my sons," he said. "They're mine." She tried to run, but the river pulled her under, cold and black. When she awoke, her nightgown was damp with sweat, and something else. She smelled the faint stench of river water on her pillow. By morning, the housekeeper, Miss Grady, came running to her room, pale and trembling. "Ma'am, the nursery door, it's open." Catherine froze. She had locked it herself. When she entered, the smell hit her first, mildew and old smoke. The cradle was still there, swaying slightly though no wind stirred. The wallpaper was peeling, and across the floor, the small footprints trailed in circles, stopping beside the fireplace. And in the hearth, half buried in cold ashes, lay something she'd never seen before, a piece of glass, jagged and black, shaped like an eye. She touched it. It was cold as ice. At once, the air thickened. A whisper brushed her ear. "Not yours, mine." Catherine screamed and dropped the shard. It rolled across the floor and cracked. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw something move in the shadows, a tall figure standing where the cradle was, its eyes like dark mirrors reflecting firelight that wasn't there. Then it was gone. Catherine barred the nursery again. But fear had already seeped through the walls of Magnolia Creek. Servants began quitting without warning. The horses refused to go near the stables after sunset. One field hand swore he saw the colonel walking by the river, coat soaked, boots dragging wet mud across the road. Even Solomon admitted he felt something near the cabin, a cold wind that came without cause, whispering names that didn't belong to the living. "He's not gone, Miss Catherine," Solomon said. "He's trying to come through. The children are the door." Catherine's hands shook. "Then we'll close it." "How?" "By breaking the bloodline." But as she said it, a sound echoed from the big house, Thomas crying again, louder this time, as if the walls themselves heard him. Catherine ran upstairs. The nursery door stood wide open. The air inside shimmered like heat rising from a road. Thomas lay in his cradle, face red, fists clenched. And above him, the portrait of the colonel that had been torn apart now hung back on the wall, perfectly straight, untouched by dust. Only one thing was different, the eyes. They were no longer painted. They were real, wet, watching. Catherine grabbed the baby, her body shaking so violently she almost dropped him. "You will not take him!" She screamed into the empty room. The window burst open. Wind tore through, scattering toys and papers across the floor. Somewhere within the storm, she heard that voice again, low, satisfied, closer now. "Then I'll take the other." She ran to the magnolia grove in the rain, clutching Thomas to her chest. Solomon met her halfway, Jonas in his arms. Lightning flashed, bright as daylight, and for one terrible moment both boys looked identical, same dark curls, same wide eyes, same birthmark beneath the left ear. Then thunder rolled, and Jonas began to laugh, a deep, unnatural laugh, not a child's sound but something ancient and mocking. Solomon stumbled, eyes wide. Jonas's skin had gone pale, almost translucent, veins like blue ink beneath the flesh. "He ain't right," Solomon whispered. The river marked him. Catherine turned, desperate. "Help me save them." "You can't save both." She froze. "What are you saying?" "The colonel's spirit wants balance. One to stay, one to go." The storm roared louder, tearing branches from the trees. The magnolias groaned and bent toward the river like they were praying. Catherine's mind raced. If the curse demanded one life to end it, which child would she give? Jonas reached toward her then, small fingers curling, eyes wide and knowing. "Mama." Her heart shattered. Before she could answer, the ground trembled. The river, swollen and wild, burst its bank. Water came roaring through the grove, black and cold. Solomon held Jonas high above his head, shouting a prayer. Catherine screamed as the current caught her skirts and dragged her down. Thunder split the sky, and through it all, she heard the colonel's voice again, whispering from the water. "Blood for blood, Catherine. One for me, one for you." Then darkness swallowed everything. When she opened her eyes, the rain had stopped. The grove was silent. Thomas was safe in her arms. But Solomon was gone, and so was Jonas. Only the empty cradle, drifting in the floodwater, remained, rocking softly as though something unseen still lay inside. Clapperboard to be continued, Part 7, The Child Who Came Back. Next time, the flood recedes, but something new walks the land. If you're ready for Part 7, comment, "He came back." Subscribe, and share this story with someone who believes curses end when the river sleeps. Because in Magnolia Creek, the river never sleeps. Would you like me to continue with Part 7, the aftermath of the flood and the return of Jonas, aged and changed in the same style and pacing, 1,000 words, historic horror tone? Magnolia Creek, The Curse of the Delta. Part 7, The Child Who Came Back. When the river finally gave up its dead, the people of Magnolia Creek thought the curse had ended. They were wrong. 3 nights after the flood, something small washed ashore. A child's body, but not the one Catherine expected. Because when she leaned over that pale face in the dawn light, the boy opened his eyes and smiled. This is Part 7 of The Curse of the Delta, the haunting of a family that defied death and paid the price in blood. If you're listening, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if your child came back wrong? The world after the flood was quiet. Mud covered everything, the house, the road, the graves. The magnolia trees leaned broken, their blossoms drowned. The river had pulled back into its bed, swollen but calm, as if satisfied. For 2 days, Catherine searched the banks, refusing to rest. Her shoes were gone, her skirts torn, but she kept walking. Then, at dawn on the 3rd day, she saw him. A small shape tangled in the reeds, his dark hair plastered to his face. "Jonas," she whispered, falling to her knees. She pulled him from the mud. His skin was ice cold, his lips gray-blue, but when she pressed her ear to his chest, she heard it. A heartbeat. Slow, wet, heavy. And when his eyes opened, they were the color of the river, dark, endless, and full of silt. She carried him home in silence. Thomas cried when he saw them, stretching his hands toward his brother, but Catherine froze. Jonas didn't look at Thomas. He looked through him. The doctor from Vicksburg came that evening, a nervous man with spectacles and a shaking hand. After examining the boy, he stepped back, pale. "He's breathing," the doctor said. "But I can't say he's alive in the way we understand." Catherine glared at him. "You mean he lives?" "I mean, something does." The doctor left before dark. He didn't take payment. That night, the whispers returned to the house. Catherine woke to the sound of water dripping, though the roof was dry. The smell of the river filled the hall, moss, mud, and something faintly rotten. She followed the sound to the nursery. Jonas stood there in the moonlight, bare feet wet, staring at his reflection in the cracked mirror. "You should be asleep," Catherine whispered. He turned. His voice was small and calm. "I was." She shivered. "Do you remember what happened?" "The river took me. And then," Jonas smiled, the slow, crooked smile of a man far older than 6 years. "Then Father brought me back." After that night, nothing at Magnolia Creek felt real. Jonas never slept. He wandered the halls, silent as a shadow, staring at things no one else could see. Animals avoided him. The dogs hid under the porch, whining whenever he passed. Thomas grew sickly. He woke screaming each night, clutching his chest. "He's here," the boy would cry. "He's standing by my bed." When Catherine ran in, there was never anyone there, only the faint ripple of muddy footprints leading back toward the nursery. One morning, Solomon's cabin was found empty. His tools lay scattered, his Bible open to the book of Exodus. On the table, scratched into the wood with a knife, was a single word. "Run." That same afternoon, Catherine found Jonas sitting by the window, humming the Colonel's old marching tune. "Where is Solomon?" she demanded. Jonas looked up, still smiling. "Gone. He was afraid of Father." "Father is dead." "Not for me." Catherine slapped him then, more out of terror than anger. The sound echoed through the house. Jonas didn't flinch. He just turned his head slowly back toward her, a line of muddy water trickling down his cheek instead of blood. "Don't do that again, Mama," he said softly. He doesn't like it when you hurt me. That night, Catherine locked both children in her room. She sat awake with a candle, praying silently, though she wasn't sure to whom. Sometime after midnight, the flame went out on its own. The air turned cold. She heard Thomas crying in his sleep, then silence. When she turned toward the bed, Jonas was sitting upright, staring at her with those dark, river water eyes. He wants to come home, Jonas said. Who? Father. He says the house misses him. The shadows behind the boy moved, rippling like water. Catherine could smell whiskey and tobacco, the scent that had once clung to the colonel's coat. Then she heard it, the unmistakable sound of boots on the stairs. Slow, heavy, wet, one step, then another. By morning, the footprints led down the hall, across the landing, and stopped at the door to the colonel's study, a room locked since the day of his death. Catherine stood trembling as she turned the key. The door creaked open. The study was untouched. The ledger still open on the desk, the decanter still half full. But the portrait above the fireplace was different again. The colonel's face had changed. He was smiling, and in his painted arms, he held a child. Not Thomas. Not the baby she had carried. Jonas. Catherine staggered back, choking on fear. She turned to flee, and nearly screamed. Jonas stood in the doorway, pale in the morning light. He says we can be a family again, Jonas said softly. All of us. Catherine shook her head. No, you don't understand. He was a monster. He says you were the one who betrayed him. You and Solomon. She backed away until she felt the cold hearth against her spine. Jonas, please. But the boy's expression was no longer his own. It was older, harder. Don't call me that. He took a step closer. The air around him shimmered like heat, and the sound of rushing water filled the room. My name is Jonathan Crane. Then the portrait behind him burst into flame. The servants heard the screams from the yard. By the time they reached the house, the study door was sealed shut, not by lock, but by something invisible. The window panes rattled, and the walls groaned like the house itself was alive. When the noise stopped, Catherine was gone. The fire had burned itself out, leaving only ash on the floor. And in the middle of it, Jonas stood unharmed, staring into the cold fireplace. Greater than, she's with him now, he said quietly. We're all together again. Clapperboard to be continued, Part 8, The Devil. In the house. Next time, Magnolia Creek becomes something unholy. The boy walks the halls like a master reborn, and those who whisper his name after dark vanish by dawn. If you want Part 8, comment, The River's Child Lives. Hit subscribe, and share this story with someone who believes the dead can rest. Because at Magnolia Creek, the dead never rest. Would you like me to continue with Part 8, where Jonas, now under the colonel's spirit, takes control of Magnolia Creek and the true horror unfolds, in the same 1,000-word format? Magnolia Creek, The Curse of the Delta. Part 8, The Devil in the House. When a ghost takes your child's face, how do you fight it? Magnolia Creek should have died with Colonel Richard Crane. But evil doesn't die. It waits, in the walls, in the soil, in the blood. Now the colonel's spirit has found a new body. And the boy who calls himself Jonas is no longer human. If you're watching this, like, share, and comment, The Devil's Heir. Because this is the story of how Magnolia Creek became hell itself. The summer after Catherine vanished, Magnolia Creek changed. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. The air was thicker, heavy with rotten iron. The magnolia trees bloomed out of season, their petals pale as bone. And the boy, Jonas, walked the grounds as if he owned them. He didn't speak much anymore. But when he did, people listened. The house servants obeyed him without understanding why. Hoffman, once cruel and loud, started drinking himself to sleep. The field hands crossed themselves when the boy passed, whispering that the colonel had returned. They weren't wrong. At night, the overseer's whip cracked even though no one held it. Doors opened and shut on their own. Lamps burned out the moment anyone mentioned Catherine's name. And sometimes, in the dead quiet between midnight and dawn, the slaves in the quarters heard something moving across the fields, a slow, dragging step, like boots soaked in mud. They said it was the colonel, walking home from the river. They said he was looking for his wife. By September, Thomas had grown pale and thin. He barely spoke. He followed his brother everywhere, as if afraid to be alone. "Mama's gone," he whispered one night to the cook, Mrs. Lottie. "No, baby," she said softly. "Your mama's with the Lord now. No, she's in the walls. She cries when it rains." That night, when Mrs. Lottie went to check the nursery, she found muddy handprints all over the wallpaper, small, perfect, and still wet. Jonas, or whatever he had become, began giving orders. He told the overseer which workers to punish and which to spare. He knew which fields would flood and which would thrive. When Hoffman asked how, the boy smiled. "Father tells me," he said. "He sees what you can't." Later that week, Hoffman's body was found hanging from the old oak near the smokehouse. His eyes were open, and his tongue had been bitten clean through. Jonas stood at the window watching as they cut the man down. "Father says liars always choke on their own words," he murmured. Solomon Tutwiler returned 2 months later. At least, something wearing his face did. The men working the north field saw him first, walking out of the woods barefoot, clothes soaked through, eyes hollow. When they called his name, he didn't answer. Catherine had once said he was the smartest man on the plantation. Now he could barely speak. "She's still here," he whispered when Mrs. Lottie brought him water. "The mistress. She's still in the house. He won't let her leave." They thought grief had driven him mad, until that night, when he stood outside the main house, calling into the darkness. "Catherine, you don't belong to him. You hear me? You don't." The wind rose, suddenly, scattering dust across the yard. The house groaned, its shutters slamming shut all at once. And then, every lamp on the property went out. When the lights returned, Solomon was gone. All that remained was his Bible, open on the steps. A single verse circled in blood. "The sins of the father shall be visited upon the children." Inside the house, Jonas began to change again. His eyes grew darker each day, his voice deeper, colder. The servants avoided him. Even Thomas began to hide when he could. But the younger boy grew sicker by the hour. His skin turned gray. He shivered constantly, even in the Mississippi heat. "What's happening to me?" Thomas begged one night. Jonas sat beside his bed, calm as ever. "You're leaving us soon," he said. "Father says he only needs one son." That same night, Mrs. Lottie saw Catherine. She swore it till her dying day. Said the mistress appeared at her window, drenched, her hair tangled with river reeds, whispering words that froze her blood. "Don't let him touch the baby." Mrs. Lottie ran to the nursery, heart pounding, but Thomas's bed was empty. Jonas stood at the door, smiling. "He's with father now," he said. By morning, the plantation was in chaos. The river had risen again, high and fast, though there'd been no rain. Livestock vanished. The fields drowned. And at the heart of it all stood Jonas, barefoot in the mud, his arms raised like a preacher. Behind him, the house loomed black and breathing, yes, breathing, its windows pulsing with faint light, its walls slick as if alive. The enslaved workers fled into the woods, screaming prayers. Jonas turned slowly, looking out over the land. "Magnolia Creek belongs to us now," he said. "The living had their chance. Now it's the dead's turn." That night, the survivors hiding in the woods saw something that made them never speak of it again. The plantation glowed faintly in the distance, a sickly golden hue. Shadows moved inside the windows, dozens of them, dancing, twisting, caught in some eternal waltz. They heard laughter, Catherine's voice, the colonel's voice, children's giggles, and then, screaming. By dawn, Magnolia Creek was silent again. The fields were empty. The house stood untouched, windows clean, doors closed. But when one brave soul, a former field hand named Joseph, crept back toward the main road to see, he stopped dead. In the front window, 2 small figures stood side by side. Jonas and Thomas, both smiling. Behind them, a shadow taller than any man rested a hand on each of their shoulders. And in the reflection of the glass, Joseph swore he saw the river, rising once more. Clapperboard to be continued, Part 9, The Return of Solomon Tutwiler. In Part 9, the curse reaches beyond Magnolia Creek. Solomon comes back with fire, scripture, and vengeance, but he's not alone. Something walks with him from the river's edge, and it remembers everything. If you want part 9, comment, "The River Remembers." Like, share, and subscribe, because next time, the dead come calling. Would you like me to continue with part 9 now? The chapter where Solomon returns to end the curse and face what's left of Catherine and the Colonel's ghost children. Magnolia Creek, the Curse of the Delta. Part 9, The River Remembers. You can bury a man. You can burn a house. But you can't drown a sin. Because the river always remembers. And when Solomon Tutwiler came walking out of that same river, skin gray, eyes cold, Bible clutched in his ruined hands, he didn't come alone. He brought the ghosts of every soul Magnolia Creek had ever taken. Like, share, and comment, The River Remembers. Because this is where the dead finally rise. The morning fog rolled thick across the Mississippi Delta, curling low over the ruined cotton fields like smoke from an unseen fire. In the distance, the burned skeleton of Magnolia Creek plantation stood against the pale sky. It had been 3 weeks since the flood, 3 weeks since the screams had stopped. No one had dared to go near the house. Not the neighboring planters. Not the sheriff from Vicksburg. Not even the scavengers who prowled abandoned land. But at sunrise on October 11, 1847, a lone figure appeared at the riverbank. Solomon Tutwiler. He looked less like a man and more like a revenant, clothes in tatters, bare feet sinking into the mud, eyes empty of anything living. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if following a rhythm only he could hear. The Bible in his hand was waterlogged, pages stuck together. The ink had bled until the words became black rivers of their own. He stopped at the edge of the old road leading to the plantation gates. In the silence, frogs croaked. The air smelled of rotten rain. Then Solomon spoke. "Lord, if I am your instrument, play me now. For the devil has made his choir." The gates of Magnolia Creek swung open on their own. The hinges screamed like living things. Solomon walked through. Every step felt like a prayer and a curse at once. He saw the house as it was, and as it had become. The white columns were streaked with black, the windows glowing faintly from within, as if lit by coals. The magnolia trees around the property bloomed with strange red flowers, and their petals bled sap the color of rust. From somewhere deep in the earth came the faint sound of weeping. Inside the main house, the air was colder. Solomon could see his breath. He could also see movement, faint, flickering shapes gliding along the walls, whispering. And at the top of the staircase stood the twins. Jonas and Thomas. Both alive, both wrong. Their eyes were mirrors, silver and empty. "You shouldn't have come back," Jonas said softly. "Father doesn't like uninvited guests." Solomon raised the Bible. "Your father's in hell, boy." Jonas smiled. "Then hell's in this house." The walls shuddered. The portraits along the hallway twisted, faces melting into skulls. A low, guttural laugh echoed through the floors, unmistakable, cruel, and familiar. "The Colonel, Tutwiler," the voice hissed. "Still trying to play savior? You were always my finest tool." Solomon's jaw tightened. "I was your mistake." He began to pray, loudly, forcefully, each verse like a hammer blow. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." The windows shattered outward. The chandeliers swayed. "I will fear no evil." The Colonel's voice rose to a shriek. "This land is mine." "No," Solomon roared. "It was built on stolen blood. And blood always calls back." The ground shook violently, knocking him to his knees. The twins began to convulse, their bodies twisting as if pulled by invisible strings. From their shadows, something began to rise. It wasn't quite human. It was tall, impossibly tall, wearing the shape of the Colonel but wrong, like a reflection in black water. His eyes glowed like stormlight. His mouth split into a grin that never stopped. "You can't cleanse sin with scripture," it hissed. "You have to drown it." Solomon looked up, breathing hard, blood trickling from his nose. "Then let's drown together." He ripped open his Bible, and from its ruined pages fell not words, but something solid, a piece of wood, dark and slick. The cross Catherine had worn the night she died. He pressed it to the floorboards and began to speak her name, over and over, like a chant. Catherine Beaumont, by the will of God, rise and see what's been done. The air turned icy. The candles went out. And then, she came. Catherine's ghost stepped through the wall, her hair streaming behind her like water, her eyes glowing faintly blue. She looked at Solomon, then at her sons. Let them go, she whispered. The shadow of the colonel recoiled. They are mine. They were never yours, she said. The house screamed. Every door flew open. Every window shattered. Wind tore through the halls, scattering ashes and papers, ripping portraits from the walls. Solomon fell to his knees, clutching the cross. Finish it, Catherine. Send him back. She turned to the twins. Thomas began to cry. Jonas only stared, unblinking. Mother, he whispered. I'm sorry, baby, she said. You were born in his shadow. But you don't have to live in it. Her hands reached out, one for each boy. The light that poured from her was blinding. When it faded, the twins were gone. So was the colonel. The house stood silent for the first time in years. Only Solomon remained, slumped against the wall, burned and bleeding, the Bible in his lap. Catherine's ghost knelt beside him, her voice soft. It's not over, she said. The land remembers everything, even what we bury. He looked up weakly. Then I'll burn the land. She smiled sadly. You can't burn water, Solomon. And then she was gone, like mist before the sun. Outside, the river began to rise again. Slowly, steadily, it crept over the banks, swallowing the fields, crawling toward the house. Solomon stood in the doorway, watching it come. He whispered one final prayer, and stepped forward. The water closed over him. And when it receded by morning, both he and Magnolia Creek were gone. All that remained was the cross, half buried in the mud. Clapperboard to be continued, Part 10, The Last Harvest. In Part 10, the final chapter, we jump 93 years ahead. When the sealed county records are finally opened in 1940, a new family moves onto the land, and what they find buried beneath Magnolia Creek will prove that evil never dies, it just changes its name. Comment, Last Harvest, if you're ready for the ending. Like, share, and subscribe, because next time, the curse comes back to life. Would you like me to continue with Part 10, The Last Harvest now, the finale that connects the haunting of 1847 to modern-day Mississippi? Magnolia Creek, The Curse of the Delta. Part 10, The Last Harvest. They say the past never dies in the Delta. It just sinks deeper into the mud, waiting. And sometimes, when the rains come heavy, the river gives back what it took. That's what happened in 1940. When the flood uncovered the bones of Magnolia Creek. What they found there didn't just rewrite history. It woke something that had been sleeping for almost 100 years. Like, share, and comment, the curse lives on. Because this is the last harvest. For 93 years, Magnolia Creek was gone. Locals called the spot the drowned place. Farmers refused to till it. Hunters avoided it. Children dared each other to walk near the water and listen. Because they said if you stood still long enough, you could hear prayers bubbling up through the mud. Then, in the spring of 1940, the government sent engineers to clear the land. A new family, the Rutherfords, bought the old plantation tract. For pennies at auction. They came from Chicago. Didn't believe in ghosts. Didn't believe in curses. They should have. The day the tractors broke ground, the first thing they unearthed wasn't soil, it was wood. Old, blackened beams, still smelling faintly of smoke. And then, deeper still, they found something else. A small, rusted cross. The foreman laughed and tossed it aside. But young Evelyn Rutherford, only 19, picked it up and wiped it clean. There were words carved faintly into the metal. Only 2 could still be read. For Catherine. That night, Evelyn dreamed of water. In her dream, she was standing in a flooded field. The moonlight shimmering over black water. Voices whispered from beneath the surface. Hundreds of them, all saying the same name. Solomon, Solomon. She woke gasping, her bedsheets damp with sweat. The next morning, the foreman didn't show up for work. They found him 2 days later. Face down in the river, his lungs full of mud. Eyes wide open as if he'd seen something coming for him. Evelyn tried to tell her father they should leave. But he just laughed. Superstition, he said. This land's rich. That's all that matters. By the end of the week, 3 more men had quit. They said the ground made noises at night. Crying, singing, whispering prayers no one should hear. But Mr. Rutherford pressed on. He was determined to rebuild Magnolia Creek. By late June, the foundations of a new house were laid. The workers said every time they poured cement, it bubbled, like something underneath was breathing. Evelyn couldn't sleep. She started hearing knocking beneath the floorboards. At first, she thought it was rats. Then one night, she heard a voice, faint but clear. "Child, you need to leave this place." She froze. The voice came from the corner of her room. From the shadow where moonlight didn't reach. And then, she saw her. A woman in a soaked white dress. Hair floating as if underwater. Eyes like blue fire. "Who are you?" Evelyn whispered. "Catherine," the ghost said. "And he's coming." The next day, the river began to rise again. It hadn't rained. There was no storm. But the water crept up the banks, inch by inch, curling around the new house like fingers. The workers fled. Mr. Rutherford refused. "No river's taking my home," he barked. Not again. That night, he went out with a lantern and a shotgun. Determined to guard his land. Evelyn followed him, against her better judgment. The fog was thick. The river roared softly, as if whispering. Then she saw something move in the water. A man, or what had once been a man. He rose slowly from the river's surface. His skin pale as driftwood. His eyes black and deep as the delta itself. A Bible hung from his hand by a broken chain. "Who's there?" Mr. Rutherford shouted. The figure stepped onto the shore. Water dripped from his coat, steaming where it touched the ground. "This is holy land," the voice said. "And it's not yours to claim." "I bought this land," Rutherford yelled. "It's mine by law." The ghost tilted his head. "Law of man, not of blood." And then Solomon Tutwiler smiled. And the river began to boil. The earth split open beneath them. Hands reached from the mud, dozens, hundreds. Gray and skeletal, clutching at Rutherford's legs. Dragging him down screaming into the black water. Evelyn fell backward, sobbing, as the lantern shattered. Fire danced briefly across the river before dying. Then, through the smoke and mist, she saw 2 small figures standing on the water. Children, twins. They looked at her with silver eyes. "He's gone now," one said. "She'll need someone to remember." "Remember what?" Evelyn whispered. "That the land never forgets." And they vanished, like candle flames snuffed by wind. When dawn came, the river was calm again. The house had sunk halfway into the mud. Mr. Rutherford was gone. Evelyn packed what she could and left Magnolia Creek forever. She told the sheriff the truth. He wrote, "Accidental drowning," on the report. But the cross she'd found, the one marked for Catherine, she kept it. Years later, when Evelyn was an old woman, she still wore it around her neck. Sometimes, when storms rolled in, she swore she could hear voices in the thunder, and see a woman standing in the rain, holding 2 boys by the hand, watching, waiting, because Magnolia Creek still remembers. And one day, when the river rises again, it'll want another harvest. If you've followed this story all the way from part 1, you've walked through history soaked in blood, love, and vengeance. Magnolia Creek is gone, but the curse of the Delta never truly ends. If you felt the chill, if the ghosts of Solomon and Catherine still linger in your mind, then like, share, and subscribe for more tales of haunted history. Leave a comment. The river remembers. Wave, because some stories never die. They just wait for you to listen.